A homeless man rents a room to a college girl, unaware she's a millionaire's daughter. Ethan had never thought he would be the kind of man who rented out a room he didn't even own. Yet here he was, leaning against the chipped doorframe of a forgotten building that smelled faintly of rust and rain, telling himself that survival sometimes looked like desperation in disguise. He was homeless, though he rarely used the word. Homeless sounded final, like a sentence, and Ethan still believed he could crawl his way back. The room wasn't much. Four walls painted in peeling beige, a single bulb dangling by a crooked wire, and a mattress that had seen better days stacked in the corner. To Ethan, it was shelter. To anyone else, it was barely livable. But he had managed to sweep the dust, hammer a few nails, and make it look, if not inviting, then at least private. Privacy, he knew, was a kind of luxury people didn't realize they needed until it was gone. He had been gone from that world for nearly 3 years. Once, Ethan had run his own contracting company, building homes that gleamed under sunlight. He knew the smell of fresh lumber, the sound of steady paychecks, and the comfort of a mortgage paid on time. Then came the collapse, a bad investment, a broken partnership, and his wife's illness, medical bills that stacked higher than any wall he had ever built. By the time he buried her, the house was gone, the business collapsed, and Ethan was left with nothing but his old truck and a stubborn will to survive. Now, crouched on the edge of poverty's abyss, he did what he never imagined. He posted a quiet, almost invisible listing online. Room for rent. No questions asked. Low price. It felt wrong, pretending he was a landlord when in truth he was a squatter in a building most of the city had forgotten. But Ethan justified it to himself. Whoever came here wouldn't care. Whoever answered that ad would be just as desperate as he was. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the girl who would soon knock on that warped wooden door was not desperate in the same way. She would walk in wearing the mask of a struggling student, clutching a backpack and a nervous smile. She would be Claire Montgomery, daughter of Harold Montgomery, one of the wealthiest real estate moguls in the state. A man whose empire of glass towers and luxury condos stood in arrogant contrast to the crumbling plaster Ethan called home. And when their paths crossed in this broken room, two lies would meet face to face. His, that he was a caretaker renting out an extra space. Hers, that she was just another broke college girl. Neither would realize in that moment that truth has a way of seeping through cracks, like rainwater through a broken roof. The room was waiting. The lie was waiting. And somewhere, fate was smiling, a cruel, secret smile. Claire hesitated outside the building, her fingers clutching the strap of her backpack as though the canvas threads could anchor her to courage. The address she'd scribbled in her notebook matched the faded numbers nailed crookedly above the doorway. She tilted her head back, staring at the cracked windows, the weather-stained bricks, and the creeping vines that had claimed the side of the building like a slow, patient conqueror. Her chest tightened. This can't be real. This can't be where I'm supposed to live. But it was. It had to be. She'd chosen this place precisely because of how unassuming it was. No one from her father's world would look for her here. No paparazzi lurking, no bodyguards insisting to check the locks, no cold marble floors where her every footstep echoed with wealth she never asked for. This was exactly the kind of hidden, ordinary corner she craved. She lifted her hand and knocked. The sound echoed down the hall, hollow and sharp, as though the wood had a story of its own, one of abandonment and forgotten lives. The door opened partway, and she found herself staring into the tired eyes of a man whose age was hard to place. His hair, streaked with gray, curled slightly at the ends, and his jaw carried the stubble of days without a razor. His eyes were guarded, but kind, as if he had once known how to smile and had simply misplaced the habit. "You must be here about the room," he said. His voice was rough, low, like gravel rolling in a tin can. "Yes." Claire adjusted her grip on her bag, trying to steady her nerves. Is it still available?" He pushed the door open wider. "Depends. You're not picky, are you?" She stepped inside before she could lose her nerve. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Her gaze swept over the space, one dim bulb overhead, a mattress in the corner, a chair that looked borrowed from another life. The walls seemed to breathe with silence. For a girl raised in glass towers, who'd grown up with velvet curtains and silk sheets, this place should have repelled her. But instead, Claire felt something strange, an odd, tentative sense of freedom. "It'll do," she said quietly. Ethan studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't look like the type who would settle for this. Her shoes were worn but clean, her clothes simple but fitted. Something about the way she carried herself, straight-backed, deliberate, spoke of someone who had always known stability. And yet, here she was, standing in his makeshift sanctuary, pretending this place was enough. He forced a smile, though it came out crooked. "All right then. Rent's cheap. Cash only. Don't ask about the building, and don't go wandering down the hall. That's the deal." She nodded. "Fine." As she set her bag down on the mattress, Ethan turned away, trying to push down the unease clawing at his gut. There was more to this girl than she let on. She wasn't like the others who came through this side of town. And Claire, though she sat quietly, her fingers brushing the frayed edge of the mattress, couldn't stop the whisper in her head, "If father ever finds out I'm here." Neither of them spoke the truth, and both had something to lose. The room was no longer just a room. It was a secret waiting to unravel. The first night was always the hardest. Claire lay on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling where shadows swayed with the faint flicker of the hanging bulb. She could hear the pipes groaning somewhere in the building, as though the old bones of the place resented being awakened again. She wasn't used to this kind of silence, not the genuine silence of a forgotten building, but the heavy, watchful kind that made her aware of every breath she took. Back home, silence was different. It was padded with wealth. The hush of carpeted hallways, the muted clink of fine china, the faint hum of climate control. Even when she locked herself in her bedroom to escape her father's rules, she never felt alone. Here, though, she felt stripped bare. The air carried no promise of safety, only the raw reality of survival. Ethan moved in the next room over. She could hear him pacing, the scuff of his boots across the floor, the occasional clearing of his throat. He hadn't said much after their deal, and she hadn't dared to ask more. But in the quiet, she found herself wondering about him. His eyes had the kind of weariness that couldn't be faked. A man who had worked hard once, perhaps, and lost more than he could admit. She recognized the weight in his shoulders, the kind of burden her father never carried because money always cushioned his falls. She shifted, pulling her blanket tighter. A flashback pressed into her mind, the argument with her father 2 weeks earlier. "You think you can just run away from your life, Claire?" Harold Montgomery's voice had thundered across the dining hall, echoing against crystal glasses and chandeliers. "Do you know what people would give to be you?" "I don't want to be me," she had shouted back. "I want to be normal. To live without everyone watching, without everyone knowing who my father is. I want a life that feels real." Her father's face had hardened, the way it always did when his authority was challenged. "Normal is for people who have no power. And you are my daughter. Don't you ever forget that." She had left that night with nothing but her backpack and a plan she hadn't fully thought through. And now here she was, lying on a mattress that sagged in the middle, trying to believe that this was freedom. In the other room, Ethan sat at a rickety table, staring at his hands. They were scarred, rough, the hands of a builder who no longer built. He had thought letting her rent the room would be simple. Cash for space, no questions asked. But when he looked at her earlier, there had been something unsettling about the way she carried herself. Not fragile exactly, but misplaced, like a diamond left in a pile of gravel. He rubbed his temples and leaned back in his chair. He didn't want to care. Caring meant getting pulled into someone else's story, and he had barely managed to keep his own together. Yet the sound of her faint cough through the wall, the way she'd looked so small when she set her bag down, lingered in his mind. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the broken window panes. It seeped through a crack above Claire's mattress, splashing onto the corner of her blanket. She sat up with a startled gasp. Before she could move, Ethan's voice called from the next room. "Don't worry. I'll fix it." And for reasons she didn't understand, the promise of that simple sentence warmed her more than the thin blanket ever could.